Next panel, like this is literally the reason why I'm hosting BUIDL Europe. This holy topic of, can Europe be great again, basically? And I mean, this panelist, Hugo is an amazing moderator. I mean, he's the perfect person to moderate it, and really happy to have him. Let's welcome Hugo, Adrian, Josef, and Diogo back to the stage. Big round of applause for everybody. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you for everyone being here. Thank you, Erica, for hosting. It's a great conference, and this is indeed a great topic. And why is it a great topic? Because BUIDL Europe can only exist if everyone here feels safe in Europe, if it is safe for every one of us to be rich in Europe and to be building here, after all. And I'm also pretty much sure that all of you, if not for the past few years, at least recently, I've engaged or I've seen a bunch of memes over Twitter and whatnot. Like, we have Levels.io living in Iriseida and producing this really nice swag, not about making Lisbon great again, that's also nice, even though Porto is also very cool. But making Europe great again, they have like these really nice sweats and these really nice t-shirts and whatnot. And you have all the American VCs bashing at Europe. Diogo even just said that we are just great at making regulation. And I will say we are not great at making regulation. We just pat ourselves in the back a lot and engage in this very toxic circle jerk that Brussels is the center of the world and we are able to coerce everyone into following our lead, which is just not true. And the fact of that is that, as you recently tweeted, Diogo, Europe is a mausoleum. And it's nice to be here. We have a bunch of public goods that really make our life comfortable. But the vibe is just not here, at least until crypto events like these started to happen more often in our shores. So that's really great. And on my end, I started in crypto in 2017 for a now bankrupt London exchange. Then I was living in Hong Kong more or less at the time as well. And the vibe in the air is just different. And here, like, you just hear these horror stories of bureaucracy. And some of you feel them in Portugal, but you go to Germany and Italy, and it's just worse by an order of magnitude. Like, bureaucracy there is 10 times worse than what it is here. And I'm looking forward to hear some stories of you on that front. So let's discuss this, and why I'm sitting here and why Erica invited me to moderate. It is because, while by day I'm now working in cybersecurity of crypto, by night I'm a friendly crypto lobbyist. And over the past few years, I was even a full-time crypto lobbyist, very focused on Portugal and Europe. Together with some people in this room, we drafted the Portuguese crypto asset tax regime. If you have any doubts about that, let us know. I also know Diogo is very, very pro the NHR regime and some other tax breaks that Portugal has, and so do we. So that's something that really helps attract everyone to Portugal and make conferences like these happen. And so that's something that will also be a core focus of this panel. So before we move and start the conversation, I just wanted to do something now at the beginning and at the end of the panel, which is trying to see from the audience who here still has hope in Europe and who is a doomer and really believe Europe is fucked. So let's just have a show of hands for the believers out there. Okay, maybe 2/3 of the room. Not so bad, even more, perhaps, yeah. 4/5. That's good. Let's see if we get to a majority at the end of the panel or not. So let's start with Diogo. And like, you have discussed about this a lot. You grew up in the US, now you moved here, and I believe that's because you're an optimist, as you just showed. But the question is, like, we all understand the problem. What should be the priorities? Like, what should be the core message we give our policymakers, and what should we, as like people voting and advocating for a better Europe, should be focused on to make sure that Europe can still make it?
So I usually focus on my little corner of the world, which makes sense. Those are the things that I'm good at. I think the general policies that obviously everybody agrees with is the deregulation ones, debureaucratization, like making things simpler and easier. If you're a Portuguese citizen, there's some stuff that is easier and getting better with a citizen's card and logins and whatever. But if you are not a Portuguese citizen, you don't have access to that, life is a little bit of a nightmare in terms of like any kind of interaction with the government. And that sort of permeates through the culture because it creates this just culture of like, we can't do anything right and we'll never be able to do anything right. And so it's kind of funny because if the government operates that way, like it permeates through the culture. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot that you can talk about. There's lots of experts here. There's lots of people that even suffered more than I have suffered on the hands of the Portuguese government or at the hands of the Portuguese government. And a lot of those things are obvious. In my corner of the world, the things that you really want to do and that I think we were doing for a little bit under the prior administration and then now we're doing less of is entrepreneurship incentivization. I have some private data that I have access to in terms of like data points that show this very starkly, which is as soon as the NHR regime and like all of that stuff, even though it didn't quite go away, it's sort of like it ebbed and flowed. The fact that the public now, basically we hit on this gold mine of marketing, not because of our own, not because we had the right to, not because we worked for it, but just out of luck. Portugal hit this beautiful vein of marketing during the pandemic as the best place, the best country in the world to live in. Everybody came here. That was beautiful. We didn't do anything about it, which we're good at doing bad things and we're good at doing nothing, and we did the former. We did the latter, which is nothing, and that was great for us. By not saying anything about the tax regime, by not knowing what crypto is, we were able to like zombie ourselves into a really good state of Portugal had like a really good. And then the moment you start putting your hands on it, everything is screwed. And then now every time you change sort of for the worst. It's not quite what happened with the tax regime, which is actually pretty reasonable, but it's certainly what happened with the NHR and what's happening with entrepreneurship, all of these programs that are helping entrepreneurship. So the private data that I have access to that shows that Portugal was growing extremely fast in terms of foreigners coming to work here and being hired remotely here. And then the moment this last thing started happening, and two things actually. People forget that the United States, we point to the United States, but the United States is not one country, right? It's a federalist system. There's 50 states. They all compete with one another, and that's extremely healthy. And in Europe, we also all compete against one another. And Spain took notice, and all these other countries took notice. So their regimes now are much friendlier. And so what you see is Portugal growing, and then we hit this inflection point, and now becomes a sigmoid S-curve, where now there's growth, but it's not actually like the second derivative is now 0. So it's not actually accelerating anymore, and it's sort of stabilizing. And Spain is just skyrocketing and on a true exponential path. And that annoys the shit out of me. Because you know what I call Spain? I call it East Portugal. That's what I call them. And so that's what I want our positioning towards Spain to be, is we're the dominant force in the Iberian Peninsula, and somehow we give it away. They saw what was happening. They saw the good things that were happening. They made changes for entrepreneurship, incentivization, debureaucratization. They made it easier for people to start companies. They made it easy for people to be nomads. They made it easy for people to work there. And now they're on a rocket ship, and I'm stuck here with you guys.
Definitely. That's very much what's happening. It's a little bit like trading crypto. Sometimes the best action is doing nothing, and people often criticize Portugal for being at the tail of Europe, but at least all the shit takes a lot of time to eat us. So we are a little bit insulated, the benefits of living in a peninsula. So let's move away from the peninsula. And Josef, you are from the Czech Republic. You just launched PWN DAO over there, which is this very cool lending protocol, fully decentralized and with a lot of potential. But would have you launched it there if you need a MiCA license? And for those who don't know, like a MiCA license is this license for typically exchanges and stablecoin providers, with some other caveats, of course. But given that you are permissionless, you don't need it. If you did, will you still launch in Europe? How will you protect yourself? And in any case, what other challenges are you facing from building over here in your own country?
Yeah, I would say there are, I guess, like principled reasons why we picked Czech Republic or like EU in general, but then there are also financial reasons. So we initially established an organization in Switzerland, started building out of Switzerland, and then we decided to move the project to another level. Then there came the question of tokenization and like how do you handle it within the regulatory regime, which like has still a lot of uncertainties, and that's true globally. Usually how companies dealt with that was essentially moving to offshore. And here comes the principle. I believe that, and being in crypto for quite some time and kind of like seeing the emergence of the opportunities in the US, for instance, where like in 2016, 2017 was nothing and people were afraid to touch it, and that has changed completely. You see the dynamic in the ecosystem. But my belief is that if crypto companies or like in this industry in general would keep on establishing their headquarters in offshores among like gambling companies and obvious like scams and so on. Like, how can we consciously want kind of the general public to think this is actually a legitimate industry? Like, if we keep getting associated with gambling companies, with basically people who are simply escaping the regulatory regimes altogether, what do we expect from general adoption? Like, how can we actually like face the regular people? So that was the motivation. It was the main motivation for, well, actually doing the legwork and establishing somewhere where we say, well, we're not trying to escape the jurisdiction, the regulations at all. We want to work with them. We want to figure out like how this new unprecedented industry of non-custodial services, things that were not really possible before, can actually coexist and can serve the general public. Like, in our cases, well, we see companies like Uniswap Labs, like doing the work, or Coinbase doing the work in the US. And I'm a firm believer that unless we actually do it in Europe as well, like, we're fucked. Like, we wouldn't be able to move anywhere. We couldn't consciously be acting like we are actually trying to build something legitimate beyond, like, the pump and dumps. The second part is, well, Czech Republic is a small nation state. It's like 10 million people. It's actually quite easy to find the regulators, to talk to them, and to have a dialogue. And I think that's also very important. On touching the MiCA part, like, we kind of took the optimistic step in like 2022, establishing a foundation in there. So we're not setting up a company, but a foundation. And MiCA doesn't touch majority of our cases, but also, like, I'm sure there will be progression in that regulation as regulators will catch up. So we just want to kind of be there on the ground, like working out our way to make sure that they hear the case for DeFi and the actual true decentralized DeFi, which isn't just a custodial masquerade, to have this like retail protection benefit. So yeah, these are largely the reasons. Obviously, I'm also Czech by origin, so I just want to make sure that like things are happening in the places which I care about.
Thank you. Definitely. Christine Lagarde was trying to accelerate the push towards including DeFi in what the so-called MiCA 2.0. The industry has been fighting hard that. I'm pretty sure we're going to win that war, but we need to be more united on that front. Like, again, in the US, the crypto lobbying agencies, and there are a bunch, it's a normally fragmented area, they fundraise 10 orders of magnitude more than we in Europe, and we have the data for that. And it's just crazy. Like, the Europeans are so used to benefit from all the public goods around that they have forgotten that, like, they really need to be advocates and put their money where their mouth is. Talking about advocacy, Adrian, you came across in my research as someone who is a very strong advocate for privacy, but not only. And at your two companies, a very nice CryptoS, not the L1. I like that kind of framing.
Oh, both of them are L1. I mean, yeah. L1s, L2s, this is all a marketing scheme, and like exactly. In the end, no one understands how these consensus systems work in practice anyway.
Yeah, but I enjoyed very much the framing you had on that. You also have a very strong focus on privacy, and you also have a lot of experience working in Switzerland too. And you recently tweeted this very nice phrase that I'm sure Diogo is going to support, which is, like, if you want to live in Europe, you should. And if you don't, you should leave. But if you stay, you should be involved and engaged. And the questions are like, in addition to entrepreneurship, benefits, tax breaks, and whatnot, what should be our priorities for engaging?
Yeah, I'll start off with the whole swing here. And like, my basic thesis is like, I think a lot of people, the early Bitcoiners really sort of positioned Bitcoin as being against the government and like being against governance systems. And like, this was never my point. Like, to me, crypto is all about like local control. It's like, and some of this is also globally decentralized control, but it's like, it's not like, to me, crypto and privacy is like for the purpose of national defense. Like, I want to build hardened, resilient systems that are actually distributed, that can survive nation-state attacks, because, like, be completely honest with yourselves, none of our financial system is going to survive a dedicated onslaught. And like, crypto to me is about building sort of like, how do we build more resilient systems, right? And so, especially in the US, it very much seems like the preppers in the US are preparing for when the government comes after them. And the preppers in Switzerland prepare for when the Russians come. And this is sort of like my fundamental belief, like, you shouldn't be afraid of your own government because, holy fuck, that's the thing that, like, the easiest for you to deal with and control. Like, you should be making sure that the system you actually are willing to live in is livable to you, right? And it's like, so as a result, I never see that crypto is sort of the escape. Like, for me, it's like, I like my local community and, like, I want to live in my local community, and, like, how do I fucking harden the systems that we rely on every day? It is, and, like, I'm 100% convinced that Bitcoin and Ethereum and, like, every global L1 goes down the moment World War III starts. Just because it's relying on global consensus and undersea cables, and those things will just go away almost immediately. And so an interesting other thing, like, I think in the beginning here we shat a lot on Europe. If you actually look at the conference space, Europe is way better. Like, we have ETHCC, we had most of the early DEF CONs. What do we have in the US? I mean, like, the only reasonable thing is, like, maybe ETH Denver, and that's kind of like borderline. The other thing, like, consensus, that's like hot garbage, essentially, to peddle this to the regulators. Like, all of Europe, like, Europe and Asia just have better conference scenes. Like, and the other thing is, I think people are worried too much right now. Like, the entire marketing narrative hype is currently swinging in the US's favor, I think for no very fundamental reason, because if you're actually building decentralized tech, if you're building open source protocols, none of the regulatory stuff in Europe matters. It's completely irrelevant. Like, I mean, yes, if you're Europe fucked it on the stablecoin issuance thing with Mika. But besides that, if you're actually building decentralized tech, Mika is completely irrelevant to you. And this is not going to change. I think the other thing that people in Europe should consider more, it's like, as we were saying, like, Europe is many places, and it's like you should pick the best from each place, right? For example, like in Switzerland, I think Switzerland has an incredibly good regime towards actual decentralized tech. The regulators there were like, yeah, it's a utility token, it's a decentralized thing, we don't care. Like, this is like obviously not something that we can regulate because it's decentralized, right? And so, like, in that case, then Switzerland sort of becomes the Delaware of Europe, which is, it's a super fucking efficient governance system where, like, dealing with the local government is super nice. There are some downsides here, but, like, generally speaking, if you pick and match in Europe and actually try to build decentralized things that aren't centrally controlled, Europe is by far the best place. Like, my co-founder just came back from the States and was like, yeah, I'm glad I'm back. Everything in the States feels like under tension. Everyone is very tense here all the time. It feels unstable. And I mean, like, this is, like, clearly, like, what you're seeing here. And, like, I think, so overall, Europe is doing way better than I think is clearly still the premier thing. Not if you're planning to, like, rely a bunch on, like, government lobbying and, like, hoping that, like, the government steps in to protect your monopoly, right? Like, that's not going to happen. And stablecoins set off. Those are fucked in Europe. I have no idea why they did this. I mean, it's ridiculous. But besides that, like, the MiCA regulations on the centralized exchange stuff, it's decent. I don't know, this seems very good. In the US, it's just like this hot mess of things. And, like, yes, there are some promises that eventually something will get written down. But, like, so one of the biggest benefits of Switzerland, or for example, Liechtenstein, is the tax code is like 100 pages. If you have an afternoon, you can just read it. It's not that complicated. They still have a tendency to remove law sometimes. And in the US and Germany, like, you just don't understand what the fuck is happening anymore. So you kind of, like, hope that you bribe the right regulator, that your business model is okay, and they will hopefully protect you against your competitors. But, like, if I was starting a crypto company, I would not do this in the US because it's way more volatile. So overall, I think, like, takeaways, Europe is, I think, still clearly winning if we stop shitting on ourselves. It is, like, has the best conference circuit in the world. After, like, it's like Europe, Asia, and then, like, consensus and, like, that kind of weird stuff happening there. And for actual decentralized tech, this is great. Also, the quality of living is nice. No one generally shoots at you. I mean, like, you laugh, but, like, I don't know if you've recently been to SF. I don't like walking around there. There are heroin needles everywhere. Like, when I spent a bunch of time there, was like, oh yeah, someone got shot on the BART again. I'm like, wait, how often does this happen? It's like, yeah, once a week. It's normal. Like, this is, like, not a nice place to be, right? So I think we should feel less bad and, like, pity for ourselves in Europe. This is way better than you expect. I mean, like, don't go to Germany and expect, like, easy, no regulatory approach. Like, if you want to have, like, an easy time, go to Switzerland, go to maybe Czech Republic now. If you want to have, like, a nice income tax regime, go to Portugal. That's way cheaper here than it is in Switzerland. But so, like, pick and choose sort of, like, what the best parts are, which is what you have to do in the States anyway, but then you get way more clarity here. the other thing is, clarity is a misnomer. Like, if you're building decentralized tech, no one is going to regulate your decentralized tech. Like, if someone can regulate your decentralized tech, you didn't build, like, you build tech, but it's not decentralized, right? So, like, stop trying to peddle to the regulators that, like, oh, please, like, put a frame on, like, put a ribbon around the tech I'm building. It's like, they're never going to do this because they're never going to go like, yeah, we have no control over this, but totally okay with it.
Exactly. The cypherpunks created decentralized tech to be fully insulated by regulation by definition, so that was the way. But I'm loving this debate. Let me turn up the dial a little bit, because I very much agree with you, but at the same time, I still believe you live a little bit more insulated than Portugal in the Swiss Valley. On the top of the mountains, like protected from everyone else, less immigration, less problems. Over a year, we are still being run over by cars. Like, security is decreasing a little bit, at least in the perceived sense. And in addition to that, we still have the other problem of, like, Europe is ruled by a bunch of old money. There's a lot of complacency, and there are not enough avenues of growth for us to sustainably protect this comfort that we so much like. So let's, like, bring that to the table and engage the other side of the equation. I was seeing Diogo over there, perhaps not fully agreeing with what we're saying, and I want to discuss that, because I want Europe to make it, but
Europe is fucked on the real economy. Like, this is like the last hope, I think. Like, Europe should bet hard on crypto. But that's, yeah.
We still are, like, the largest economic market in the world, but we can tap into it because, like, Europe tried to scale the Swiss dream. Switzerland is kind of a DAO. The European Union is a major DAO, and has all the problems of governance that we see in the other DAOs. Like, no one cares about voting, no one cares about what people are doing in Brussels, and no one cares about what Thierry Breton and the EU Commission is doing, until recently, at least, when we were able to fire him. So what's wrong with that, and what can we do to change it?
I guess, like, I'm slightly more optimistic on, like, in the sense of, like, Europe being fucked. Zoom out. It's like, I mean, you know, like, Europe has been the economic center for, like, how long? Like 500 years. Like, it's quite. And I'm not saying like this will necessarily continue. It's like, and during that time, a lot of the wealth that like we're now trying to protect and sitting on was created, right? And I'm obviously not saying like this is certain it will be like up only afterwards, but I also think it's like fine to take the backseat for a while. And obviously there's like a lot of the comfort that people come to Europe for. So it's a choice, right? There's like 7+ billion of like people living on this earth. Like some of them just prefer like comfort over just the most like capital efficient solutions out there. The more into globalized society we get, like the more opportunities, like, and hopefully through the tech stack that we are building are going to open up like to Europe as well, and the more of like the people living in Europe or choosing Europe to be the place to live in will open up to them as well. I think like these days we're seeing a lot of regulatory competition. There's a lot of like the I guess the overall Trump narratives like being adopted by a lot of the politicians in Europe, which for better or worse can lead to a looser environment or more economically friendly environment for the entrepreneurs here. But coming back to the just like the 2016, 2017, which isn't that long time ago, most of the people in the industry, and obviously I'm biased, is the same as like posing a question from the audience, like who are the people here who are optimistic on Europe, and majority of the people raising their hands. Obviously the people not raising their hands aren't here. Still a lot of the innovations that I see are coming from like Europe-based startups. A lot of the like European founders have moved to the US to get their capital there, which is completely fine. And it's, I mean, the capital is more available in the US. It's just that's the economic migration, right? It's like part of the grand scheme of things.
Just to throw this in, like I think this is like what the European funders kind of don't understand. Like the capital markets are fundamentally global. And if you're in Europe, you should never raise from Europe. Holy crap. Like the Europeans have no idea. Like there's two avenues to raise. It's like either from the US or from Asia, and mostly a combination of them. Don't talk to European VCs with the exception of like one or two. They're all kind of trying to go like, oh, where's your production plant? Can we visit it? I mean, but it's fine. Like, this is not a problem. Like, you don't have to move to the States to talk to an American fund.
Yeah, and this is a good point, and kind of like coming to the point of what I'm saying is that like if we actually believe that we are building this globalized stack that will be like harder to regulate because it will actually be decentralized, it will actually be global, it will actually be permissionless and accessible from anywhere. I think a lot of those like economic factors such as like access to capital and so on will ease out. So right now we're talking about like where to set up a company. Should it be US? Should it be Europe? I think in kind of the long run, it doesn't matter all that much because with the technological advancements, we are going to erase a lot of those factors in the next couple of decades. So it's in the end, it's a personal choice right now. Like, well, for me, the convenience of Europe definitely wins over like maybe some easier access to capital. It's you know it's an overhead worth paying at this point in time, in my opinion.
Yeah. Look, the capital one is an easy one, but it feels like even if we just focus on that one, if you want to start a company, everybody incorporates in the US. And the value that is created there. And the IPOs are there. And the people making money are them. And the pension funds that are actually growing are theirs. And you know, to a certain extent, that what's happening is that the economic value that is being created even by us is actually accumulating somewhere else. I don't know how any of us can sort of look at this and say this is a sustainable approach. It's like we're in a mausoleum. Yes, it's really nice right now, but you know the problem about mausoleums is that they gather dust, and if there's no economic activity, they sort of like crumble into decay. And so that aspect, I think, is just totally unresolved. And it might be that we've lasted for 500 and we're going to last for 50 more. But as a person that grew up in Europe and as a Portuguese person, I'm just like, okay, that's not what I want, right? I ruled the oceans for like 200 years. I want that back. You know, how do we go do that? And so there's that. Plus, I think it's like huge hand wavy to say that somehow is the same. It's not the same to be in San Francisco and building a company and being a company in Europe. The pattern matching of a VC is such that they will not give money to European founders and they will give money to somebody that graduates from Stanford. That is a huge issue. A global market and global economic market is trying to like obviate the day-to-day lived experience of every single entrepreneur, which is if you're an European entrepreneur, on average, you're going to raise 5 times less or 10 times less capital.
Don't ever brand yourself as a European entrepreneur either.
And so, but you're fighting like it's everything. You're fighting everything. It's just like the reality is that the pattern matching works. If you're in fucking San Francisco, that's where AI is. That's where all the company, all the wealth, all the generated, and the general talent exists in Europe, like a programmer and a 10x coder. If the talent is general enough, it's generalized enough, you can definitely find it here. But if it's specific, how many people in Europe have actually built a database that does like 100 million QPS? Zero. How many? Oh, there's one over there. How many people have actually done in Europe? They're like, it's all in the Facebooks and the Googles and the whatever, and it stays in the ecosystem. And that means that like the deep tech, the things that actually create the value, the fucking spaceships that are going to space, like they're built where you have the talent. That's what's happening. And so it just feels sad. Maybe it'll be okay. Maybe we'll always be a backwater. And maybe it'll be like okay, but it doesn't feel like. I just intuitively don't agree that the objective that you're setting for yourselves is the right objective for us to set.
I agree with this. So, I mean, specifically, I think if you have to differentiate a little bit between sort of the things that want to IPO. And right now, yes, those probably all end up in the US, and we should change this. And things that like touch the real world economy, like the US is building spaceships, and we are arguing over whether we should pass new AI regulation. Like same for like if you're running physical. Like if you have to run data centers because we want to train large-scale models, like you have to be in San Francisco. I think if you want to build the decentralized stuff, because you're globally decentralized anyway, I would never pick Germany, for example, because like, again, this is like picking California to incorporate your LLC. That's idiotic. I'd pick like some reasonable jurisdiction in Europe. But I think for especially sort of the globally decentralized, where like you don't have a core sort of company headquarter where everyone sort of goes to the same office every day, I think Europe is like a very nice place to live. I think in order to actually fix sort of the longer term problems that Europe clearly is facing, and if we don't do this, we will be this economic backwater, because like no matter how much we pretend that this industry will drive a lot of the value, like where the spaceships get built kind of matters, like where the real economy still does advances, where the robots sit that run modern production lines sit, that really matters. And like my take on this is we need a couple of things. We need to replicate the NHR regime. Like, this is honestly giving tax breaks for 10 years that are fairly unbureaucratic for people that want to start companies in Europe. Holy crap, this is like the easiest fucking thing to do. It is really not that difficult. The other thing is, I think across Europe, we have to very much move into, we need cheap energy. Like any European that doesn't, and like Germany should stop building solar cells. I mean, have you been to Berlin like for most of the year? It is not a sunny place. Like Portugal, yes, sure, we should build more solar farms, fine. But like in Germany, my take is on this, and I'm from Germany originally, that probably in 5 years or so when Germany realizes it's deep in the shit, they're just going to reactivate the coal mines. So Germany's sitting on a fuck ton of coal deposits, and I think after they shut down the nuclear power plants, we're just going back to coal mines. It'd be fine. It'd be like relatively cheap energy, right? So like I think this is like, for crypto, I think Europe is way more positive, unless you plan to build like the next centralized exchange, then you have to deal with Mika, and there are like some oddities there. Sometimes, if you're building a decentralized thing, Europe is great, but again, not a lot of the value is going to accrue to like the specific Lisbon economy. Even though for Lisbon, this is very different. The NHR really saved this. But like to save Europe overall, we need to focus on the real world economy. As in, we need to be building nuclear power plants like there's no tomorrow, ideally by buying American aircraft carriers without the guns and just like by tugboat pulling them up the Rhine. This is actually a decent strategy. The US Navy can build a nuclear reactor in like 2 years. It's fine, and they are generally safe. They've been operating for decades at this point. But like, so for crypto, pick the place that's nice for you to live in. And if you care about Europe, get involved locally in your politics and like go for nuclear power, cheap energy, reasonable immigration policies, like tax breaks for...
One of the things that I have difficulty with is actually like the term real world economy. If we're not working on the real world economy, what the fuck are we working on? I mean, what is it? Like, what is it? And so the problem is that we're only successful if we are affecting the things that work with the current real world economy. And I think that decentralization is extremely important for a couple of core protocols on the internet that allow us to have coordination. And the majority of people here are just going to build a company. And they're just a company. It's going to make money, and you're going to be the CEO, and congratulations, maybe make money. So that's going to be the way you're going to do it. And for 99% of the companies, I think the centralized route is going to be the obvious one because it's the most efficient, is the one that is a well-trodden path, is the one that's just like, it's a no-brainer. Like, why you're going to focus on the way that the company is ran, why you're going to innovate there, innovate on the product. And the decentralized ones and the folks that benefit from it are actually going to be far and in between. So if it's like a 1% 99, then we built, Europe maybe is great for people building these decentralized protocols, but who cares? It's 99% of the rest that is affecting the real world economy that is trying to build companies that is going to feel the current bureaucratic pressure, that's going to feel the current regulators, that's going to feel the lack of availability of talent, just being choked.
Honestly,
right?
go to Switzerland, if for the centralized things even, or Liechtenstein, because they're sitting on like this like, or Czech Republic, go to the small European states because they want to make money and they're generally very willing to help you. And like the way EU regulation works is this year-long process where national regulators eventually have to decide on how to implement certain MiCA rules. And for example, in Liechtenstein, they're just very easy on it. In the Czech Republic, they seem to be very easy on it. So it's like, don't maybe pick the most horrendous regulatory regime, so never pick Germany, essentially. But generally speaking, like you can build a lot of the centralized things, even in Europe, I think, but you like don't get driven by the narrative that everything is terrible here. Like this really specifically depends on where you are.
Yeah. We'll open the floor for one final question from the audience. We'll also allow our speakers for some closing thoughts. But Josef, your take on these, and based on what you said before, also a final question. Do you think that the fact that crypto kind of crystallizes this global capital market that really enables people to be living here, perhaps have a foundation incorporated somewhere, but still tap like the American and even the Asian markets as well? Do you think that suffices for us to create the kind of economic growth that Europe needs to survive, or not?
Not as a whole. I think like there was a very, very like valid point of like the size of the overall like rest of the economy. And obviously like I'm in honesty not competent to talk about the rest of the economy. Like I live in crypto, like this is the industry of my choosing, right? So from like if you're a crypto founder, then I think like why not do it here? Like I don't actually see that many constraints for the reasons that were mentioned from both parties. If you do something else, then obviously like pick the jurisdiction which works within the industry of your choosing that gives you the same accesses. So like, I just want to kind of make that clear. But yeah, overall, I'm optimistic and positive of like, well, we actually will be increasingly reaping the benefits of the stacks that we are building, tapping into the more globalized market. Like, and maybe this is crypto specific thing, but for that, I'm very like Europe optimistic.
Nice. Okay, Miguel, I'll give you. Look first at you and easier. Yeah, only one question.
Start up to the point. So basically, there's a contrast between comfort of life and like Europe is a fantastic place to live, our personal lives, and where do we grow our culture and our innovation and new opportunities. And this is, I think, one of the key points of the problem of old Europe is that it is a bit ossified. Like, the things that are beautiful are the old ones. We need to build newer beautiful things that are new and are innovative, and we have to make our whole society see that it needs to create that opening. We are not creating that opening. Our laws are ossified. Maybe Switzerland is an outlier, but I think that's a key conversation point, is like, how coordinated is Europe on like creating openness for new markets, new opportunities, new innovation, right? We want to build rocket ships here, either digital or physical.
Wait, I think we've built the digital rocket ships here. Like 90% of the things that you use in crypto right now were all built in Berlin. We've just got to be very realistic. Like, Ethereum was built in Berlin. Most of the core, like, Europe clearly still has the talent lead on building the rocket ships of our industry, excluding the centralized stuff. Those were all built in the States. That's true. But like on the actual protocol things, they were all built in Europe. So I think the biggest challenge is to convince young people that they shouldn't join Volkswagen, and that they should instead do something interesting. Because, I mean, this was the historic path that everyone took. It's like, it's a super safe thing. Being self-employed is super risky. You won't get a pension. I mean, and the nice thing is maybe Europe is doing us a favor right now because the traditional industries are collapsing. Like, no one is going to get a pension anyway. If you're 20, don't fucking bet on a government-based pension. You better start saving now because they're all bankrupt. So it's like, maybe at some point in the next couple of years, we're actually forcing young people into going like, what are alternatives? Because the existing path is just not super attractive anymore.
Joseph?
I would say take risks. Like, as it was said, you know, if you're a young person, like, start a company. If you're an older person sitting on that like generational wealth inherited from your parents, then like go and fund those young entrepreneurs. I mean, that's what the SF life is, I guess. So take personal risks, and then some of those will work, some of them won't.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure what to say here, but one thought is that part of the reason why Europe has been successful at crypto is because the United States has been so adversarial towards it. So I honestly think from now on, things are going to revert back to the mean for the next 4 years at least. So maybe insofar that there's going to be another administration that later on is going to be less friendly towards crypto, people stick around to see what's happening. But there is a huge like outflow of people coming from the US. I mean, even the foundations themselves, like, let's be real, like 99% of the foundations have no reason to exist. They only exist as a regulatory arbitrage because nobody wanted to be responsible for doing capital allocation on a potential security in the United States of America. And I sit as chairman of one of them, right? And so it's one of these things of like, it's not completely true. I'm exaggerating, of course, but the fundamental is there. So if there's more risk-seeking and there's more clarity of the road for a lot of these things, I mean, layer ones are supposed to be decentralized, and all of them have to care about securities laws. And so I think they can happen in the US. And so even then, like, now we have something against even the crypto dominance, which I agree has happened a lot in Europe. Even that is at risk now because our regulations are getting worse and theirs are getting better now. And so I don't know. This is something that concerns me. In terms of like what a closing thought is look, I hate being involved in politics. I'm way more involved in American politics than I am in Portuguese politics. But it sort of feels to me like we're super capped by what we can do by Europe. And so there's this like weird thing that I can't get past, which is we want to do changes and change stuff, and then people say Europe doesn't allow us to. And I haven't quite like, you know, I've only been back to Portugal for a year. I haven't quite like reasoned what that actually means. What are the boundaries? You know, what can we actually do within the confines of of the system that we found ourselves in. And that is a little bit frustrating from an individual perspective that now has to live in the country.
Thank you.
Just to build on this, as European countries, we should all just disregard European law. It takes decades to enforce this. It's fine.
We should all just
ignore European law. Like, it's fine. Like, this is what the U.S. states.
This is not lawyers' advice. Please seek your own counsel.
But like, as local regulators, like, do this. Like, this is what California does all the time. They just ignore the federal government. And Europe doesn't have an army or police force. Like, are we going to like take over Portugal if they pass useful regulations? No, it'd be fine.
I find it funny because before you said we should cooperate, and now you're saying we should rebel. I'm all in for rebellion.
I mean, you shouldn't like negotiate the bail terms after, right?
You should just be able to just leave. Just leaving with two hopes. I hope that everyone in this room, maybe with the Trump administration, feels more the urgency to invest back in the ecosystem, fund your crypto advocacy organizations, fund your friends' startups, and if you are really rich, fund the next beautiful buildings, because we need more physical stuff in crypto as well. We need the near headquarters, maybe not done in a brutalist, modernist, communist style, but perhaps in beautiful, like neoclassical buildings like the ones we have here.
Exactly. I wanted to
Lisbon
make sure it's not brutalism that you're funding.
Erica, thank you for organizing it. Have a good lunch, everyone.